I knew something was wrong the second I stepped out of my truck and heard my electric meter roaring like a jet engine. That cabin of mine, my peaceful mountain escape, my sanctuary from the city, was glowing like a Christmas tree even though I hadn't turned on a single light. And then I saw it, a bright orange extension cord, snaking across my porch, slithering into the trees like some kind of neon umbilical cord feeding a parasite. Before I could even process it, she stormed out of the woods. Karen. Frizzy blonde hair, oversized sunglasses, attitude bigger than the mountain itself. And when I confronted her, when I told her to unplug her illegal power tap from my home, she didn't just argue, she called the cops. On me. Right there on my porch, screaming into her phone that I was stealing community electricity from her, as if the property she trespassed onto somehow belonged to her. And trust me, that was just the beginning. Before we jump into the full story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you've ever dealt with a Karen or HOA nightmare, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss how this one ends. The truth is that cabin meant more to me than just four wooden walls sitting on a ridge. It was my escape hatch from the noise of the city, the deadlines, the traffic, the endless buzzing of other people's problems. I'd spent years dreaming about owning a place up in the Smokies, a spot where the air is cold enough to sting your lungs in the morning and quiet enough at night that you can hear the creek a quarter-mile away. And when I finally found it, a 5-acre patch of forest with a small log cabin tucked between two ridges, I didn't hesitate. I signed papers so fast the realtor joked I might sprain my wrist. Those first weekends felt like something out of a magazine. I'd drive up on Friday evenings with a cooler full of groceries tools rattling in the back of my truck and my mind ready to switch off from the world. The cabin had been empty for a while, so it needed work, fresh boards, new paint, insulation, clearing brush, but I loved every second of it. There's a sort of honest therapy in doing work with your hands, especially in the kind of quiet that only mountains can give you. And because I'm an engineer by trade, the first thing I tackled was the electrical system. I hired a licensed electrician, installed a brand new meter, updated the breaker box, and even replaced half the outlets myself. I wanted the cabin to be safe, reliable, and ready for years of weekend retreats. Everything felt perfect for a while. Then the electric bills started creeping up. At first I didn't question it. Everything costs money, right? Maybe I'd left something running. Maybe the new heater pulled more power than I thought. But month after month, the numbers kept rising, even though I only stayed there 2 days a week. One bill was almost triple the previous month, and that's when the first real wave of suspicion hit me. Still, life got busy, work got heavier. I shrugged it off and told myself I'd look into it during the next trip. But the next time I drove up, as soon as I stepped out of the truck and heard that electric meter spinning like a demented roulette wheel, all my earlier excuses evaporated. Something was sucking power from my cabin like a parasite. And since everything inside the cabin was turned off, that meant the problem wasn't inside. It was outside. I walked the perimeter, checking outlets, wires, anything unusual. That's when I saw a faint path through the brush-flatted pine needles, broken twigs, something or someone moving through that area recently. My stomach tightened. I'd never said this out loud before that moment, but the thought hit me sharply. Someone has been here when I wasn't. There's a special kind of anger that comes from realizing a stranger has touched your property. It's something primal, a breach that digs under your skin, but anger without proof is just smoke. So instead of storming through the woods looking for answers, I decided to test a theory. I went inside, killed every breaker in the box, and walked back outside. The cabin went dark silent, but the electric meter kept spinning. That was the moment I felt heat rise up my neck. Breakers off, no appliances connected, no lights, no heater, yet the meter was spinning just as fast as before. That meant one thing: someone was pulling power directly through the exterior outlet. I crouched by the outlet under the porch railing. It wasn't warm, not yet, but there were faint scratches on the plastic. And the earth beneath had impressions like something heavy, maybe a reel of cable, had been dragged across it. A normal person might have gone straight to the police. But I'm not exactly wired that way. I wanted to know who. I wanted to know how long. And more than anything, I wanted to catch them red-handed so there would be no denial, no excuses, no, "oh sorry, misunderstanding." So I planned a stakeout. The following weekend, instead of parking in my usual spot near the cabin, I pulled off the road about a quarter-mile back, tucked behind a line of spruce trees. I hiked quietly up the old logging trail that curved behind my property and settled in where I had a clear view of the driveway. I brought coffee binoculars, a flashlight, and more stubborn determination than common sense. Morning came, slow fog curling like smoke through the branches. Birds chattered in the canopy. For a while I wondered if I'd made it all up in my head. That maybe it was a faulty meter or some stupid mistake I'd overlooked. Then a white SUV rolled slowly up my gravel driveway. I froze. The woman stepping out was around mid-40 seconds, blonde hair frizzed into a humidity halo, big sunglasses, and a posture that screamed, "I own the world." She looked around like someone checking for witnesses rather than enjoying the view. Then she walked briskly to the side of the cabin, opened her trunk, and pulled out a massive orange extension cord, the commercial kind you use for power tools. She plugged it into my outlet like she was plugging into her phone charger. No hesitation, no shame, no guilt. She'd done this many times before. I felt my pulse hammer in my chest as I climbed quietly down the trail, anger and adrenaline mixing into something sharp. My boots hit the gravel, and I strode toward her, not yelling yet, just moving fast enough that she didn't notice until I was almost on top of her. "What do you think you're doing?" The woman spun around, startled at first, but then, unbelievably, her expression twisted into annoyance. "Excuse you," she snapped. "You can't just sneak up on people like that." "I'm the owner of this cabin," I said, pointing at the cord. "And you are stealing my electricity. I have every right to use this outlet," she shot back, as if reciting some personal scripture. "This is a mountain community. We share resources." "No," I said, "we don't. Unplug that cord, now." She folded her arms like a child, refusing vegetables. "I've been using this electricity for weeks. I need it more than you. My power got shut off." "How heartless are you?" I stared at her, unable to believe the level of entitlement pouring out of her like a broken faucet. "Your power bill isn't my problem. You are trespassing, and you are committing theft." "Go ahead," she said, lifting her chin. "Call the cops. They won't do anything. I'll just tell them I'm renting this cabin." I almost laughed at the stupidity of it, but instead I took out my phone. Her eyes widened for a split second. Then came the shrill nails on glass scream, "Don't you dare film me. I'm calling 911. And she did right there on my porch, telling the operator I was attacking her, threatening her, trying to stop her from accessing community. Electricity. It was so absurd I actually checked the sky to make sure I hadn't fallen into some weird dimension. But believe me, the real insanity hadn't even started yet. Because the moment that cruiser rolled up my driveway, everything changed. And Karen finally learned the one thing she should have known from the start: I don't bluff, and I don't back down. I heard the crunch of gravel long before I saw the cruiser. Mountain roads echo like long metal throats. Every sound carries, especially when the person making the call is screeching loud enough to scare wildlife 2 counties over. Karen stood in the middle of my driveway, waving her arms like a stranded airline marshal, shouting, over here, he's the dangerous one, dangerous." Me, a middle-aged engineer holding nothing more than a phone and a bruised sense of patience. The cruiser pulled up 2 officers inside. The driver stepped out first, a tall guy with the sort of calm, neutral expression worn by someone who's seen too much stupidity to react anymore. The second officer, shorter, younger, stayed by the car, hands on his utility belt, eyes scanning everything. Karen rushed toward them like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. "Officers, arrest him immediately. He tried to assault me. He's stealing electricity. He's harassing community members." Her voice cracked on the last word like she was performing for an invisible camera. I half expected applause from the squirrels. The taller officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, slow down. One at a time." "What exactly happened?" She jabbed a finger toward me. "He attacked me because I was using the community outlet. He screamed at me and chased me through the trees. He thinks he owns this mountain." The officer turned to me. "Sir," I simply lifted my hand and pointed at the bright orange extension cord stretching across my porch like a fluorescent snake. If the officers followed that cord with their eyes, they'd see it trailing into the woods, disappearing into a patch of shrubs and pine needles where it continued downhill toward her property. I spoke calmly because someone needed to be the adult. "Officers, I own this cabin. I have the deed, the power account, everything. I found this woman trespassing and stealing electricity from that outlet." I pointed again. All breakers inside the cabin were off. The meter was still spinning. She plugged that in while I was off the property. "And that's a lie," Karen screeched. "He rents from me. This is my community. This is OUR shared power." The younger officer blinked twice. "Shared power, yes," she barked. "Mountain community rules." Now, mind you, there is no HOA here, no association, no bylaws. Nothing except the general rule of the mountains: respect property lines unless you want a shotgun pointed at your truck tires. The tall officer seemed to know it. He rubbed the bridge of his nose like he wasn't paid enough for this. "Ma'am," he said, "do you have any proof that you rent this cabin to him? Any contract?" Karen froze for half a second. Her pupils flicked sideways, classic sign of someone who just realized they've walked straight into a wall of their own lies. "Well, I don't have it on me," she sputtered. It's at home, safe, very official. Okay, the officer said. But right now we need something to confirm what you're saying. She hesitated. Then she inhaled deeply, lifted her chin, and said, I don't need to prove anything. He's the problem. I decided it was time to accelerate things. Officer, I said, handing over my folder, here's the deed, the utility bill and my name, photos of the electric meter from this morning, and logs of the spikes in energy when I wasn't here. The officer accepted the papers, flipping through them while Karen hovered close behind him, trying to peek and simultaneously acting offended that he was looking at them at all. When he got to the meter photographs, his eyebrows lifted. These were taken at what time? 6:12 a.m., I said. All breakers were off. No appliances were running. So what was drawing power? I nodded toward the cord. He followed its path with his eyes, then walked over to it, then bent down. His gloved fingers lifted it from the dirt. He gave me that look cops give when they realize the person yelling the loudest is the one guilty. Ma'am, he called. Where does this cord lead? It's none of your business, she snapped, perhaps the single worst answer she could have picked. The younger officer stepped up. Actually, it is. If this cord is pulling power without permission, that's theft. Karen's face turned a shade of tomato red that would make the Hines family proud. It's temporary, she screamed. My power was turned off because of a mistake. The company is fixing it next week. He doesn't even live here full time. He won't miss a little electricity. The tall officer exhaled weary. Ma'am, that's not how the law works. I could have hugged him. Let's follow the cord, the younger officer said. Karen immediately threw herself in front of them like a frantic soccer goalie. No, you can't go down there. That's my private property. The tall officer looked her dead in the eye. If the cord is connected to stolen electricity, we have cause to inspect it. I almost burst out laughing at the expression on her face. Watching Karen grapple with the realization that the police weren't dancing to her tune was like watching a cartoon villain realize their plan had a giant hole in it. She stomped. Her foot literally stomped it like a 5-year-old denied candy. This is harassment, she shrieked. I know my rights, so do we, the younger officer replied calmly. And then the three of us, me and 2 officers, began walking down the slope following the orange cord. Karen followed behind us, shouting threats, half-truths, insults, and dramatic pleas to the universe. The deeper we went into the woods, the uglier the trail became. Broken branches, footprints, and tire ruts from a wheelbarrow. At the bottom of the hill, tucked behind a clump of overgrown rhododendrons, was her house. Calling it a house might be generous. It looked like someone took a mobile home, wrapped it in aluminum siding, and prayed it wouldn't fall apart in the next storm. And there it was. The orange cord ran straight into her living room window. Inside, visible even from the yard, were a rattling mini fridge, a space heater glowing red, 2 lamps, a TV, a microwave, and God help me, an ancient AC unit duct taped to the wall. The younger officer whistled long and low. Well, that's a lot. The tall officer turned to Karen, who now looked like she might either faint or combust. Ma'am, is there any reason you didn't mention you had multiple appliances running on a cord connected to someone else's property? I needed it, she shouted. It's cold, and my food will spoil, and the TV, I need it for safety. Noise scares away. Bears. I couldn't stop myself. There are no bears on this side of the ridge. Shut up, she screamed at me, which only made her look worse. The tall officer radioed something in, then motioned for her to stand aside while he photographed everything. Karen kept pacing, ranting about injustice and corrupt utility companies and how neighbors are supposed to help each other, while simultaneously telling them she never met me before today. The contradiction didn't help her. After the officers finished documenting the scene, they led her back up the hill. She kept insisting she'd done nothing wrong. Then the officers turned to me. Sir, the tall one said, we're going to recommend charges for trespassing, utility theft, and filing a false report. We'll need a formal statement later. Karen let out the kind of shriek usually reserved for horror movies. You can't do this to me. I'm the victim. This is my mountain community. No, ma'am, the officer replied. This is his property, and you've got a lot to answer for. As she protested, struggling, sputtering, the younger officer gently cuffed her hands behind her back. The sight of that orange cord lying limp on my porch behind her felt like poetic justice. A bright, tangled symbol of how entitlement always knots itself up in the end. They guided her toward the cruiser. She screamed the whole way. Something about lawyers, something about calling the mayor, something about suing me for emotional distress. But the moment the cruiser door closed and the locks clicked, the mountain went quiet again. Peaceful. Just the way I intended when I bought the place. They drove her off the mountain, her shrieks fading into the distance like some kind of unhinged wildlife call echoing through the trees. You'd think the story would end there with Karen in the back of a cruiser, justice served, peace restored. But life in the mountains has a funny way of stretching things out. Nothing is ever that simple. The officers stayed behind for a few minutes, taking additional photos and asking follow-up questions. The tall one, Officer Daniels, pulled out a small notebook and flipped to a fresh page. "Sir, before we clear out, walk me through your timeline one more time," he said. So I did. From the strange electric bills to the spinning meter, from killing the breakers to planning the stakeout, all the way up to catching Karen with the orange extension cord in hand. Daniels wrote everything down carefully, nodding occasionally, his expression shifting from neutral professionalism to something a little more annoyed. Not at me, at her, at the nonsense they'd been dragged into. "Just so we're clear," he said, "after I finished, you never gave her permission to be on your property or to use your utilities." "I wouldn't let a cousin borrow electricity," I said, "let alone a stranger with a cord longer than most driveways." The younger officer, Cole, I think his name was, snorted, a laugh, but quickly pretended he hadn't. Daniels closed his notebook. "All right, we'll file the initial report. The detective unit will follow up for formal statements. From what we saw, this is a pretty cut and dry case." He hesitated. "She may try to spin more stories. People like her tend to double down before they give in." "Trust me," I said, "I already figured that out." They got into their cruiser and began reversing down the driveway. I watched the taillights fade through the trees until the mountains swallowed the sound completely. Then, for the first time that day, I exhaled. Silence. A real one. Not the Karen-enhanced, police-flavored chaos that had been dominating my morning. But that silence also made something else ring loud inside me. This wasn't over, not yet. I walked back toward the cabin, stepping over the imprint of Karen's boots in the dirt. That damn orange cord still lay across the porch like the shed skin of some dead electric snake. I followed it back to the outlet and crouched beside it. There were scratches all around the plastic plate, tiny marks from repeated plugging and unplugging. She hadn't used it once or twice. She'd used it often. I rubbed a thumb across the surface, trying to guess just how many weeks she'd been leeching off me. My bill history told one story, but my gut told me something bigger was happening here. Something she wasn't clever enough to pull off alone. There was a thought lurking in the back of my mind, something I'd brushed aside earlier but couldn't ignore anymore. What if she wasn't stealing just from me? What if she'd been stealing from other cabins too? The idea settled into me like a splinter, small but impossible to ignore. I stood and scanned the tree line. From this angle, you could see the slope leading down toward the other properties. There were old paths, game trails, and narrow walkable cuts between trees that locals used to move between homes when they didn't feel like taking the long route around the road. If she'd dragged that cord down one of those paths, maybe she'd dragged others from different homes. Maybe this wasn't her first rodeo. I wanted answers, and I wanted them soon. But before I went hunting for more proof, I needed to secure my own place. So I went inside, grabbed a pair of wire cutters, and headed back out. The satisfying snip of the cord, cleanly separating, echoed across the porch. I tossed Karen's end into the woods, let her dig for it if she wanted. Then I unscrewed the exterior outlet cover and replaced it with a locking outdoor box, the kind that requires a key to open. Was it overkill? Probably. But then again, I'd never had to protect my home from a full-grown woman acting like electricity belonged to the public domain. After I finished, I went back inside and double-checked every breaker appliance and plug. Everything was off except the fridge and emergency lights. The meter outside slowed to a gentle crawl, finally reflecting the use of a normal, sane human being. For the first time since arriving, I felt my shoulders loosen. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat on the porch, and tried to relax. But my brain wouldn't let go of the lingering question: was Karen acting alone, or was I just the first one smart enough to catch her? I didn't have to wait long to find out. An hour later, I heard soft steps coming from the dirt road. I turned and saw an older man, maybe in his 70s, walking with the help of a wooden cane. He had the look of someone who'd lived in the mountains long enough to become part of them. Sun-tanned skin, weather-beaten jacket, gray beard, trimmed short. "Morning," he said, with a polite nod. "Morning," I replied. He paused at the edge of the porch. "Saw the police going through earlier. Everything all right up here?" I chuckled bitterly. "Depends what you call all right." He tapped his cane lightly on the ground. "Heard rumors Karen was up to something. She's been poking her nose around a lot of cabins lately." My eyebrows shot up. "You're kidding." "Wish I was," he said, lowering himself onto the porch step. "Couple of the folks down the hill mentioned lights flickering at odd hours. One neighbor said he found footprints behind his garage. Another swore his outdoor outlet had been tampered with." My stomach tightened. So it was more than just me. The man leaned in, slightly lowering his voice. "She's always been entitled, I guess. acts like she's queen of the ridge, claims she's head of some kind of mountain committee that only exists in her imagination. I sighed. Figures. "What'd she do to you?" he asked. So I told him the whole story from start to finish. When I got to the part where she called the cops on me, he let out a long whistle. "Well, son," he said, "looks like she finally messed with someone who knows what they're doing. Most folks up here don't know much about electricity. Hard to prove a theft without knowing how the system works." "Lucky me," I said. "Luck." He shook his head. "Sounds more like good sense. The mountain needs more folks like you." His words warmed me more than the coffee. But the man wasn't done. "You should know," he said carefully. "Karen's been in trouble before. Not officially, but she's crossed lines. More than once. People were too polite or too tired to fight her." "Not anymore," I said. "I'm not letting this slide." He nodded approvingly. "Good. Keep your eyes open. She'll fight this tooth and nail before she admits fault." I figured as much. He stood slowly, brushing pine needles off his jacket. "If you need anything, you come by my place down the hill. Name's Randall." "Thanks, Randall," I said. "Seriously." He tipped his head. "Take care now. And watch your outlets." With that, he walked back down the dirt path and disappeared among the trees. I sat there letting his words settle in. This wasn't just about a cord or a few dollars of electricity. It was about someone who carried entitlement like a weapon, someone who believed rules didn't apply to her, someone who needed to be stopped. And I had a feeling the next steps were going to be even uglier and a whole lot more complicated than catching a thief with a bright orange cord. But one thing was absolutely certain. Karen had picked the wrong mountain, the wrong cabin, and the wrong engineer to mess with. Randall's visit lingered with me long after he disappeared down the trail. The man had only stayed for a few minutes, but he dropped enough information to light a fuse inside my head. Karen hadn't just stolen from me, she'd been creeping around other properties, messing with outlets, sneaking through back trails. And most folks, according to him, were either too intimidated or too exhausted to deal with her. I wasn't intimidated. And after everything she'd pulled, I sure as hell wasn't exhausted. If anything, I was fired up. But before diving deeper into the Karen mystery, I needed to get my formal statement ready for the sheriff's office. They'd be calling soon, and being thorough mattered. So I went inside, grabbed my notebook, and began reconstructing the timeline with engineer-level precision meter, readings, breaker tests, cord direction, times dates, everything. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. When someone like Karen starts acting cornered, lies become their first language and volume their second. Around late afternoon, my phone finally rang. Unknown number, county sheriff's office. The man on the other end introduced himself as Detective Harris. His tone was firm but polite, the kind of guy who had probably seen every flavor of mountain nonsense imaginable. "Mr. Dalton," he said, "we've reviewed the initial report submitted by Officers Daniels and Cole. We'd like to schedule a formal interview with you, whenever you need," I said. "Good. Tonight or tomorrow morning tonight works." He gave me a time and directions to the substation down in town. I made a mental note, finished writing in my notebook, then stepped outside for some fresh air. The mountains were shifting into late-day gold sunlight, spilling between the pines, casting those long shadows that make everything feel somehow more peaceful. Exactly the kind of moment that used to be the highlight of my trip. Now it only reminded me how quickly peace can be broken by the wrong person. I decided to walk the property again, this time approaching from the direction Karen would have used. I stepped off my porch and headed down the trail she'd clearly trampled dozens of times. The more I followed the path, the angrier I grew. She'd been here often, too often. Branches were snapped at arm height. Holes in the soil showed where something heavy sat repeatedly, like the reel of cord. Even the ground was worn in the same shape boots leave when someone stands in place for a while. This wasn't borrowing. This was routine theft. I reached the clearing halfway down the slope and crouched. From that angle, you could see my cabin's porch through the trees, just enough to check if I was home before sneaking up. She had planned this. She had timed it. She had relied on the fact that I was a weekend visitor. But then something glinted in the pine needles. A small silver metal piece. I reached down, brushed away the debris, and recognized it instantly, part of a three-prong adapter, cheap-worn and slightly bent. It looked like something pulled from an overloaded socket. I slipped it into my pocket. More evidence. I kept walking until I reached the bottom of the hill, back toward the rough area behind her home. I didn't step onto her property, no need to make myself the villain in her next dramatic police call, but I looked around from a distance. Her backyard was a disaster zone. Old tires, broken appliances, a rusted swing frame. plastic bins stacked to the point of collapse, the kind of chaotic yard that screams, "Stay away unless you're wearing gloves and a tetanus shot." Then I noticed a second extension cord running through her window, this one blue, a different gauge, a different route. And it led not to my cabin. It led uphill toward the neighbor's property. A chill went through me, not from the wind, but from the realization that Karen wasn't just tapping my electricity. She was running a full-blown, multi-source parasitic power web like some kind of off-grid electrical octopus. And those neighbors probably didn't even know. I backed away carefully. This was no longer just a personal vendetta. It was the whole mountain's problem. I headed back up the trail, pacing faster than before. When I reached the cabin, my phone buzzed again, this time a text from Randall. Saw Karen's brother pull up to her place just now. Might cause trouble. Just a heads up. Fantastic. Just what I needed. A supporting cast member for Karen's circus. I locked the cabin door and grabbed my keys. Time to head down to the sheriff's office before any new nonsense erupted. The drive to town was peaceful, at least visually. The mountains rolled like giant waves, frozen in green, the kind of scenery that usually calms the mind. But my mind wasn't calm. It was ticking, organized, focused, methodical. I replayed Karen's tantrum, the lies, the cord, her home setup, all of it forming a pattern: entitlement, desperation, and a reckless belief that rules didn't apply to her. When I pulled into the sheriff's substation lot, Detective Harris was already standing outside, leaning against the doorframe. Tall, broad shoulders, gray in his beard, the look of a man who preferred facts over drama. Good. I had facts. "Mr. Dalton?" he asked. "That's me." He led me inside to a small room, not an interrogation room, nothing dramatic, just a desk, 2 chairs, and a coffee maker that looked older than I was. He motioned for me to sit. "Let's start from the beginning," he said. I walked him through everything, handing over the folder with photos, meter, logs, timestamps, and the new evidence, the broken adapter piece I'd found on the trail. He inspected it closely. "That's a melted ground adapter. Looks like someone's been overloading some circuits." "Wouldn't surprise me," I said. "She's running a space heater, AC, fridge, microwave, all through extension cords. And not just mine." He looked up sharply. "Explain." So I told him about the blue cord that led uphill. Detective Harris sat back, tapping the table thoughtfully. "We've had complaints the past few months," he admitted. "Flickering lights, breaker trips, odd meter spikes. We chalked it up to old wiring and storms." He narrowed his eyes. "But if what you're saying is right, she's been leeching off multiple cabins," I finished. He exhaled slowly. "This is worse than I thought." I expected him to be shocked. Instead, he looked tired, like a man who had seen variations of the same problem for years, but was always one witness short of stopping it. "Karen has a history," he said quietly. "Petty disputes, noise complaints, some civil issues. Nothing criminal, until now. There's always a first time," I said. He nodded. "And you might have just given us enough to make it stick." We spent another half hour refining my statement. Once done, he stood and shook my hand. "Thank you, Mr. Dalton. We'll be moving forward with charges. But between you and me, brace yourself, for what people like her don't go down quietly." I almost laughed. "You don't say." He cracked a thin smile. "We'll keep you updated." I left the station with a mix of relief and adrenaline, feeling like we'd turned a corner. But just as I pulled into the grocery store parking lot to grab supplies before heading back up the mountain, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail from an unknown number. I played it, and my blood pressure jumped. "This isn't over," Karen screamed through the speaker, her voice cracked, furious, borderline feral. "You think you can get me arrested? I'll sue you, I'll take your cabin. You messed with the wrong woman, just wait." The message ended with a slam, like she'd thrown the phone. I listened twice just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. She was out, already, which meant her brother or someone had bailed her out fast. "Fantastic," I muttered. I sat in my truck for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel. She was coming back. Of course she was. But this time she wasn't walking onto my property with a cord. No, she'd come with rage lies and the full fire of someone who'd been publicly embarrassed. And as much as I wanted to believe the worst was behind me, I knew in my gut that the mountain wasn't done with Karen yet. Not even close. I sat there in the grocery store parking lot, gripping the steering wheel, as Karen's unhinged voicemail echoed in my head. The whole thing felt unreal, like the start of one of those true crime podcasts where the host says, "podcast." And that's when things took a darker turn. But this wasn't a podcast. This was my life, my mountain, my peace shredded by one entitled woman who thought electricity grew like berries on a bush. I stared out at the parking lot for another minute, letting the voicemail sink in. She was out of custody way too fast. Either the charges hadn't been processed yet, or someone bailed her out immediately. Maybe the mysterious brother Randall mentioned. Maybe she'd charmed someone. Maybe she'd screeched until someone couldn't take it anymore. Regardless, I didn't like the idea of her being loose and angry. I clicked my phone off and forced myself to breathe. I wasn't going to be bullied back into my truck with fear. I wasn't going to let her dictate how I lived my life in the mountains. I'd bought that cabin to get away from chaos, not to invite more of it. So I walked inside the store, grabbed what I needed, and headed back up the mountain road. Every twist of that winding road felt heavier than usual. The trees seemed closer. Shadows stretched longer across the gravel. I kept checking my mirrors, not because I expected to see Karen tailing me, but because I wouldn't have put it past her to follow me from the station in some dramatic attempt to confront the liar she'd decided I was. But thankfully, no white SUV appeared behind me. By the time I reached my driveway, the sun had dipped low enough that the sky looked bruised purple edges, final streaks of pink fading behind the ridge. I pulled into my usual spot, shut off the engine, and just listened. Silence. Real silence. No shouting. No police radios. No entitled banshee screaming about community electricity. It was almost eerie. I grabbed my groceries and walked toward the porch, glancing around the property as I went. The orange extension cord still lay where I'd tossed it earlier. I left it there. Let it rot in the dirt like a monument to stupidity. I unlocked the cabin door and stepped inside. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. Warm wood, faint scent of pine cleaner, soft hum of the fridge. Nothing disturbed. No signs of forced entry. No missing items. Good. But before I could fully settle in, something about the atmosphere tugged at my spine and itched that something was off. I set the groceries down and stepped back outside. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was just Karen's voicemail ringing in my ears like a threat stuck on replay. Whatever it was, I trusted it. I walked the perimeter again, slower this time, more attentive. The sky darkened, further stars beginning to poke through the canopy. The woods always turned colder faster at night, and I tugged my jacket tighter. I circled the cabin, shining a small flashlight along the ground, scanning for new footprints or disturbed branches. Behind the cabin near the generator shed, I found something I hadn't seen earlier, another extension cord, this one green. Not attached, just lying there coiled neatly like someone dropped it or forgot to grab it in a hurry. I picked it up and turned it over in my hand. Newer than the orange one. Cleaner. No melting or fraying. And the length long enough to reach from my outlet to somewhere else on the ridge. A fresh chill rolled through me. Not fear. Alertness. Someone else had been here recently, maybe even after I'd cut the orange cord. And they'd left in a hurry. I scanned the tree line again. Nothing but dark bark and deeper shadows. But the forest had a way of hiding things, animals, people, mistakes. I slipped the green cord under my arm and went back inside. If Karen had returned or sent someone else, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. I set the cord on the table and grabbed my mini trail camera from my gearbox. Then I headed back outside and mounted it high on a tree trunk facing the path she'd used. Nothing was getting onto my land again without me knowing. Back inside again, I locked the door and finally unloaded my groceries. I made dinner, poured a glass of water, and tried to shake off the creeping feeling that the situation was evolving faster than I could track. My phone buzzed again. For a split second, my stomach tightened, but it wasn't Karen. It was a number I did recognize. Randall, I answered. Hey, Randall, he spoke in a low voice. You at your place now, yeah. Why, he exhaled sharply, the sound crackling through the old phone. Thought I should warn you. Karen's brother Joey, he's bad news. Loud, stupid, quick to fight. Works odd jobs, gets fired from all of them. He's been stomping around down here, swearing up and down that you set his sister up. My jaw clenched. Great. That's not all, Randall continued. Saw him load something into the back of his truck. Hard to see in the dark, but it looked like tools. Extension cords. Maybe even a damn generator. He was muttering something about fixing the score. My pulse thumped. Is he headed up here? No idea. Just didn't want you blindsided. I appreciate it, I said. Really. Stay alert, Randall replied. He ain't got Karen's level of skemmin', but he's got more muscle than brain. The line clicked off. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of those words settle. The mountain nights were usually comforting, quiet, predictable, but suddenly everything felt coiled and tense, like the woods were holding their breath. I closed the curtains, double-checked the locks, and turned on the porch light. Its warm glow spilled across the dirt, illuminating the area where the orange cord still lay. And that's when I noticed something else. Something subtle, something chilling, a fresh set of tire tracks. Not from the police cruiser, not from my truck. Different tread, wider spacing. They led right up my driveway, then looped around, then headed back down the mountain. Someone had been here while I drove to the sheriff's office. Maybe Karen's brother. Maybe Karen herself. Maybe both. The realization sank deep. Whatever this mess was, it had escalated far beyond stolen electricity. Now it was personal. Now it was angry. Now it had unpredictable pieces moving in the dark. I stepped back into the cabin and shut the door, firmly locking it again, even though I'd just done so minutes before. The familiar click felt weaker tonight, like it wasn't quite enough. I set a chair near the front window and watched the woods for a long while, the porch light casting sharp shadows across the yard. Every rustle of leaves made my grip tighten. Every distant owl hoot made me straighten. Hours passed before I finally forced myself to bed, though I didn't sleep well. My dreams were a mess of orange cords, shrieking voices, flashing police lights, and shadows moving between the pines. When morning finally came, pale, cold, unforgiving, I dragged myself up and checked the trail camera footage. At 2:17 a.m., the motion detector had gone off. The footage showed a blurry silhouette standing at the edge of the trees, just beyond the porch light. Broad shoulders, hood pulled up, arms at his sides. He didn't approach, didn't speak, just stood there for almost 3 minutes, watching my cabin. Then he turned and walked back into the woods. The timestamp burned into my retinas, 2:20 a.m. My jaw tightened as I replayed the clip again and again. No doubt about it, this wasn't over. Karen had lit the fuse. Her brother had picked it up. And the mountain had just become a battleground I hadn't asked for, but one I wasn't backing down from. Not now. Not after everything she'd already done. The moment I saw that shadowy figure on the trail cam standing there in the dark at 2:17 a.m., something in me shifted. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was a cold, razor-sharp kind of awareness. The kind you feel when you realize someone has crossed a line so deeply that the situation is no longer just an annoyance or a misunderstanding. No, this was now a confrontation waiting to happen. I replayed the footage several times, zooming in on the blurry silhouette. The hood covered most of his features, but the broad frame and the slightly hunched posture matched exactly how Randall had described HOA Karen's brother. The man who apparently lacked Karen's imagination but had double her aggression. I set my coffee cup down and rubbed my temples. I'd come up here for quiet, for peace, for some damn meditation under pine trees, not for some midnight stalker theatrics. But that's what I had now, someone hovering near the edge of my property watching, plotting God knows what. I made a decision, a simple one, a necessary one. This was not going to be another weekend of me being reactive. I was going to take control. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my jacket, and went outside. The early morning air bit at my face, sharp cold, almost metallic in its chill. The kind of cold that wakes you up faster than caffeine. Frost still clung to patches of grass and the roof of the old generator shed. My breath puffed in faint clouds as I walked toward the spot where the figure had stood. The ground told a story. Footprints deep, deliberate. Boots larger size. Fresh. He'd stood there just inside the tree line where the light from my porch barely reached. Where he could see me if I stepped outside, but where he could melt back into the woods in seconds if he needed to. I crouched down and examined the prints. They were angled slightly toward the back trail, the same one Karen had used to steal electricity. It meant he knew where that access point was. It meant he'd probably used that path before. The hair on my arms prickled. I scanned the woods quietly, expecting stupidly to see him again. But the forest was empty, the only sounds, the rustling of branches and the faint whistle of wind pushing through the pines. Still, the unsettling truth lingered in my chest. He'd been close, too close. Close enough to reach my porch if he wanted. I straightened up, tightening my fists in my pockets. I didn't want this turning into a Wild West showdown. I wasn't going to arm myself or escalate things with threats, but I wasn't about to let myself be intimidated either. So I went inside, sat at the table, and called the sheriff's office. Detective Harris answered on the third ring. "This is Harris." "It's Dalton. I've got new information." I filled him in about the mysterious tire tracks, Randall's warning the green cord, and now the trail cam footage showing someone watching my cabin during the night. I expected him to be surprised, maybe alarmed, but he responded with a long, tired sigh. I figured something like this might happen, he said. Karen's the type who spirals. And if her brother's involved, that complicates things. I'm not asking for a patrol car to camp on my porch, I said. But I want this documented. I want it on record that someone trespassed again last night. You did the right thing calling, he replied. Send me the footage, and keep the camera running. I emailed him the video file while he stayed on the line. And Mr. Dalton, he added, voice softer. Yeah, keep your doors locked. Don't ignore your instincts. Trust me, I said. That's the one thing I'm not ignoring. After hanging up, I ate a quick breakfast and tried to focus on normal tasks, fixing a loose railing, sweeping the porch, stacking some firewood. But every little noise snapped my attention back toward the tree line. Was I being watched now? Was Joey somewhere out there again? Or was the mountain just being a mountain, creaking, shifting, whispering through the wind? By noon, I decided on another step. One that didn't escalate things but added a layer of protection. I drove down to town and bought 2 more trail cameras, a motion sensor floodlight, and a reinforced lock for the back gate. The cashier, a woman in her late 50s with curly hair and reading glasses, gave me a curious look. Setting up a wildlife project, she asked with a smile. Something like that, I answered. Just capturing footage. Well, the bears come out early this year, she chuckled. So you'll get plenty of video. If only she knew, I thought. After loading everything into the truck, I grabbed lunch at a small diner, trying to shake the constant feeling that someone was lurking in the shadows of my day. But even as I ate, my mind kept drifting back to the mountain, to the footprint, to the silhouette on my camera, to Karen's unhinged voicemail. Something was building, a pressure, a sense of inevitability. By the time I headed back, clouds had rolled in thick gray, heavy with the promise of rain. The mountain road was darker, quieter. I drove slower, scanning every bend, every turnout, every patch of forest. When I finally reached my driveway, the first thing I noticed was the shape. A truck, parked halfway down my drive. Not mine, not the sheriff's. A dented silver pickup with mismatched doors and mud-splattered tires. My pulse jumped. That had to be Joey's. I pulled in carefully, keeping a respectful distance between our vehicles. The cabin stood quiet behind him, porch empty, door closed, no broken windows, no signs of forced entry. But the truck being here at all was already a violation. I stepped out, my boots crunching on damp gravel, and called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No answer. I raised my voice. "This is private property. You need to identify yourself." Still nothing. The wind picked up, rattling leaves like a warning. I took a few steps forward, eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The truck was cold engine off for a while. No one was inside. I circled toward the back of the cabin, heart thudding, expecting the worst, another cord, another trespass, some kind of sabotage. Instead, what I found froze me in place. A small metal box sat on the ground behind the cabin. Open, wires spilling out. And the side panel of my breaker box was pried loose just slightly, but unmistakably. Someone had tried to tamper with my electrical service. Not steal, not borrow, tamper. In anger, in retaliation, or in some pathetic attempt at a lesson I didn't know, but the implication was crystal clear. This wasn't about electricity anymore. This was personal. I crouched, examining the box. The wires had been pulled, but not fully disconnected, likely because whoever did this didn't know what they were messing with and got spooked. Maybe the trail cam triggered again. Maybe headlights from a passing car scared them off. Maybe they realized they were about to fry themselves. But the job wasn't amateur. It was impulsive, messy, driven by rage, which meant one person: Joey. I stood up, fists tightening at my sides. A slow burn of anger rolled up my spine. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I wasn't about to let some hot-headed idiot vandalize my home. I walked back toward the front of the cabin, scanning the woods as rain began to fall in soft, cold droplets. And that's when I saw him. A figure emerging from the tree line. No hood this time. No hiding. No subtlety. Just broad shoulders, clenched fists, and a storm of anger marching straight toward me. He stepped out of the trees like he'd been carved from the shadows. Broad shoulders, heavy boots, jaw clenched tight enough to snap his own teeth. Even from a distance, I knew it was Joey. He carried the same energy Karen had, but compressed into something heavier, more physical. Where she used theatrics, he used raw threat. The rain had shifted from drizzle to a steady fall, now droplets beating on his jacket as he walked toward me. with the deliberate pace of someone who had convinced himself he was in the right, someone who had worked himself up into a righteous fury. He stopped a good 15 feet away, feet planted chest, rising and falling like he'd just marched up a mountain which he had. "You," he growled. "Just that. No greeting, no explanation, no pretense of civility." I crossed my arms, keeping my voice even. "This is private property. You need to leave." He jabbed a thick finger toward my cabin. "You had my sister arrested. She had herself arrested," I corrected. "She was trespassing. She was stealing. Shut your mouth," he snapped, stomping closer. "I don't give a damn about your excuses." I held my ground. "Then you're not interested in the truth." "Truth?" He laughed one sharp, humorless bark. "The truth is, you embarrassed her. You humiliated her. You called the cops like she's some kind of criminal." "She committed a crime," I said. "Multiple, actually." Something behind his eyes flickered a mix of anger and confusion, like part of him wanted to understand, but the other part, the bigger part, refused. "She was desperate," he barked. "The power company screwed her. She had no heat, no lights, and that's not my responsibility," I said. "You don't solve a problem by stealing from other people." "From neighbors," he spat. "Out here, mountain folk help each other. That's how it's always been." I shook my head. "Helping is one thing. Stealing without asking is another. She never once talked to me. Not once. She hid in the trees, Joey. She used cords like tripwires. That's not helping. That's sneaking." He took another step. Too close now. Close enough that I could smell the cigarettes on his jacket, see the rain dripping from the brim of his cap. "You're gonna fix this," he said, voice low. "You're gonna drop the charges. You're gonna tell the sheriff you made a mistake." I blinked slowly. "I'm not dropping anything." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "You damn city people," he muttered. "Think you own the world. Think you're smarter than everyone." I didn't respond. He wasn't here to listen. The rain thinned his voice a little, turning his shouts into dull thumps against the wet air. He took another step, and that's when I reached into my jacket. His eyes widened. He froze. I pulled out my phone. Not a weapon, not even a tool, just the phone. I raised it and hit record. Joey's face twisted in instant, panicked anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing, documenting?" I said calmly. "The sheriff already has a report from me about trespassing. If you want to stand here threatening me, you're welcome to keep talking." "I ain't threatening. You're on my land. You approached me aggressively. You ordered me to drop charges. You're demanding I lie to law enforcement. That's coercion, Joey." He blinked, rain dripping down his brow. "Stop saying my name. You walked up to me while trespassing. You tampered with my breaker box. The sheriff has photos." He pointed sharply toward the cabin. "That box was already loose." "No," I said, voice steady as granite. "I checked it earlier today, and I saw the tracks from your truck." He stiffened. "Got him. You need to leave." I continued. "Now, before this gets worse for you." For a moment, just a moment, I saw something shift in him. A hesitation, a flicker of doubt, a sense that maybe he'd stepped into something bigger than he'd anticipated. But ego is a powerful thing, especially when the sibling causing the trouble is someone like Karen. He puffed up again. "You think a damn phone scares me?" "No," I said, "but jail might." He opened his mouth, probably to bark another threat, but at that exact moment a branch snapped in the woods behind him. We both turned. A figure emerged, older, slower, but far more grounded. Randall. He walked out with a walking stick in one hand, rain dripping from his hat brim. "Well," Randall said mildly, "this looks like trouble I didn't get invited to." Joey's posture tightened. "Stay out of this, old man." "No," Randall said, simply stepping closer. "I won't." Joey squared his shoulders. "I'm handling family business," Randall snorted. "That's what your daddy used to say right before he'd get himself arrested for a fourth time." Joey reddened, eyes flashing. "Don't talk about him. I'll talk about whatever I damn well please," Randall said, barely raising his voice. "You're standing on someone else's land. You're yelling. You're threatening. And you're too stupid to realize the sheriff already knows you're involved." "The sheriff doesn't know anything," Joey shot back. "Oh, he knows plenty," Randall said. "He talked to me this morning. Seems your sister's story didn't hold up too well." I watched Joey's shoulders stiffen like a bull preparing to charge. For a second, I thought this was about to turn into a full physical confrontation. My hand hovered near my pocket, not for a weapon, but to be ready to call the sheriff again. Then Randall stepped up next to me, not shielding me, not confronting Joey directly, just standing there. Firm. Unmoving. A wall. "You can do one of two things," Randall said calmly. "Walk back to that rusty truck of yours and leave. Or you can stand here and give this man every reason in the world to bury you in charges. I don't give a damn about charges, Joey growled. Then think about Karen, Randall said. Because everything you say right now, it's going to make her case worse. Much worse. Something flickered again in Joey's eyes, confusion mixed with reluctant self-preservation. She's already in deep, Randall continued, and you blowing up at her victim isn't going to help. You want to protect your sister, walk away. The wind blew through the trees, carrying the scent of wet pine. Joey stood there, breathing hard, chest-heaving, fists clenched. He looked from Randall to me, to the phone still recording. Finally, he spat into the dirt. Fine, he muttered. But this isn't the end. It was exactly what Karen had said. And just like her, he turned and stormed off shoulders, stiff boots splashing through puddles as he made a beeline for the silver truck. He yanked the door open, slammed it shut, revved the engine loud enough to rattle the leaves, and skidded backward down the driveway. The moment he was gone, the mountain exhaled. It wasn't peace, not yet. But the immediate storm had passed. I lowered my phone and hit stop on the recording. Randall gave a low whistle. Someone ought to teach that boy how to pick his battles. I'm guessing he learned from his sister, I said. Randall chuckled. And she learned from someone even worse. I raised an eyebrow. Meaning, that family's been causing problems up and down this ridge for years, Randall said. Entitlement runs in their blood the way sap runs in a pine tree. I sighed, wiping the rain from my brow. This is getting out of hand. It's been out of hand, Randall corrected. But now you've got evidence, and a whole lot of people willing to back you. He put a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't comforting in a sentimental way, but in a steady, grounding way. You're not alone up here, he said. Not anymore. I nodded, letting that sink in. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something new settle inside me. Not fear, not anger, strength, because now I knew the mountain had my back. The rain eased into a misty drizzle, as Randall and I stood there watching the last echoes of Joey's truck fade down the mountain. The tension didn't disappear, it clung to the air like humidity, but the immediate threat had passed. For now, Randall gave my porch a long look, then the breaker box, then the damp trail where Joey had emerged. He wasn't a man who liked drama, you could tell. He was the type who preferred fishing rods and quiet mornings, the kind of neighbor every mountain community needed more of. You should check inside, he finally said, shifting his weight on his cane. People like him, sometimes they do stupid things when they're angry. I didn't argue. We walked inside together. The cabin was exactly as I'd left it, warm wood, the faint hum of the fridge boots by the door tools on the table. But now even these familiar things felt like they were holding their breath. I half expected to find a window cracked or something rearranged, but the place was untouched. Randall scanned the living room, then nodded. Good. Looks like he didn't get inside. I exhaled slowly. I think he came here just to try intimidation. And failed, Randall said flatly. But that doesn't mean he won't try again. I rubbed a hand down my face. I'm so damn tired of this. He chuckled softly. Welcome to mountain life. 99% peace, 1% chaos. Usually caused by people exactly like those two. He walked over to the window and peered out. The trail cam was still mounted, blinking faintly. You keep that running, he said. You'll want every second recorded. I nodded. Already planned on it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft patter of rain on the metal chimney cap. Finally, Randall cleared his throat. There's something else you should know, he said. I turned. What now? He hesitated just for a second, then lowered his voice. Karen's not done. Not by a long shot. I figured that part out already. No, he said gently. Not like this. She's got a way of twisting things. Makes herself the victim. Makes others the villains. And she gets people riled up before they realize they're fighting for a lie. Meaning I asked. He sighed. Meaning I heard she's been making phone calls. Lots of them. Telling anyone who'll listen that you attacked her, threatened her, that you rigged the power system to hurt her. My jaw clenched. She's lying again. Randall shrugged. To folks who know her, yeah. To the new cabin owners who just moved in a mile up the ridge, maybe not so obvious. I scrubbed a hand across the back of my neck. The idea of more drama spreading across the ridge made my stomach twist. I'd come up here to escape drama, not become the center of it. So what do? I asked. Stay calm, Randall said. Keep documenting, and don't let them bait you. The sheriff's office already knows the truth. You did everything by the book. I nodded, absorbing it. Thanks, really. He waved a hand dismissively. Don't thank me. Thank the trail cam, and your phone, and your common sense. He headed toward the door. "I'll check in later. Don't hesitate to call if anything happens." When he left, the cabin felt both safer and heavier, like the walls were aware the storm wasn't over yet. I sat down at the table staring at my phone, debating what to do next. Part of me wanted to drive straight to the sheriff's office and show them the footage of Joey approaching. Part of me wanted to set more cameras, reinforce the shed, install a full perimeter alarm system, and part of me wanted to just pack up, go back to the city, and let the mountain chew up the entire mess without me. But that's not who I am. Not anymore. Not after everything they'd done. I decided on the smart route: gather more evidence, secure the property, and stay level-headed even if they were spiraling. I went back outside and mounted the additional trail cams I'd purchased earlier. One faced the driveway, another covered the back of the cabin where Joey had accessed the breaker. The motion sensor floodlight I installed pointed directly at the tree line where he'd been standing the night before. By the time I finished, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained heavy and dark, a gray blanket pressing low over the trees, the kind of sky that made the mountain feel quiet in an unnatural way. I returned to the cabin, started some coffee, and sat on the porch with the mug warming my hands. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. It was hard to tell in the mountain stillness. Then I heard footsteps, soft, slow, deliberate, not heavy like Joey's, lighter, hesitant. I stood up and scanned the trees. A silhouette appeared on the path this time, not a hulking figure or a shadowy stalker. It was a woman, no sunglasses, no screeching, just a soaked rain jacket and a timid posture. I recognized her immediately. She was one of the newer cabin owners Randall had mentioned. A couple from Florida had bought a place up the ridge a month ago. I'd seen her once but hadn't met her officially. She raised a hand weakly. Hi. "Is this the Dalton cabin?" I nodded slowly. "That's me." She stepped closer, wringing her hands nervously. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I think someone's been spreading stories about you." Ah, there it was. I leaned against the porch railing. "Let me guess, Karen." Her eyes widened. "Yes, and her brother. They came by our place this morning. They said you were dangerous, that you tried to electrocute her, that you threatened them. They told us they're forming a complaint group against you." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Of course they are." I didn't believe them, she added quickly. "Not really. But I wanted to hear your side." I nodded. "Thank you. Sit down if you want." She hesitated, then stepped onto the porch. "I'm Anna." "Nice to meet you, Anna." She settled onto a chair. "Look, we're new up here. We don't want trouble. But they were banging on our door early, saying they needed signatures. They said you were being investigated, that you attacked her during an electrical dispute." I let out a humorless laugh. Is that what she's calling it now? The rain-thick air hummed around us as I summarized the entire situation, what Karen did, how I caught her, the police involvement, the trail cam footage, the attempted tampering with my breaker box, even Joey's visit earlier. Anna's face shifted from concern to disbelief to anger. "My God," she whispered. "She's been lying through her teeth. Since the moment she stepped on my property," I said. Her hands curled into fists. "And she made us feel guilty for not signing her stupid petition. She said you were trying to destroy the mountain community spirit. That's one way to phrase not letting her steal, I guess." She bit her lip. "We'll support you. If there's an official complaint, we'll back your version. And we'll tell the other new neighbors. People shouldn't be fooled by her." Relief washed over me, warm and unexpected. "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." She smiled weakly. "And honestly, you seem a lot more reasonable than they made you sound." "I try." We talked for another few minutes, and then Anna headed back up the ridge, promising to spread the truth among the folks Karen had tried to drag into her delusion. When she left, I felt lighter. Not safe, not done, but supported. Then my phone buzzed with a new message from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it. A picture. Of me. Taken from the woods. From the same angle the trail cam had caught Joey, and a text underneath, "You should have minded your business." My stomach dropped. My grip tightened, and something inside me, something fierce, unshakable, rose up. This wasn't just theft. This wasn't just harassment. This was escalation, and it was time to end it. The moment I saw that photo, me standing on my own porch, taken from the shadows like I was some animal being tracked, a cold fire lit inside my chest. Not fear, not shock, something sharper. Something that said, "All right, now I know exactly what you're trying to do. They weren't just reacting anymore. They were planning, scheming, watching, and that crossed into a whole different territory. I put my phone down slowly, staring at the image again as rain tapped on the windows. The angle was unmistakable. Whoever took it had stood in nearly the same spot where Joey had lingered 2 nights before. A place just barely outside the reach of my floodlight. A place someone familiar with the woods, or someone who'd already used that spot, would choose to hide. The text beneath it burned in my mind. You should have minded your business. I sat there for nearly a minute, breathing slowly, letting the initial surge of adrenaline settle so I could think clearly. Knee-jerk reactions were how people got hurt in situations like this. I needed logic, strategy, control. I saved the photo, took a screenshot of the message with the timestamp, then forwarded everything straight to Detective Harris with a short note, "They're stalking my property. I have visual proof now." I didn't expect a reply immediately. It was still early evening, but knowing it was documented gave me one thing I desperately needed: leverage. The kind of leverage that turned a messy neighbor dispute into a criminal investigation. I set the phone down, stood up, and paced the cabin. I could feel something simmering low inside me. Not fear. A kind of anger I hadn't felt in years, anger sharpened by violation. I paused by the window, staring out at the darkening tree line, waiting, listening. Nothing moved, but the woods suddenly felt too still, like whatever had been out there had slipped away the second I saw its handiwork. I ran a hand through my hair and forced myself to step away from the window. I locked both doors, double-checked the latches, and walked to the porch to flip on the floodlights. Bright beams washed over the yard, transforming the forest edge into a harsh metallic wall of branches and shadows. "You want to play games in the dark," I muttered under my breath. "Not tonight." I went back inside and took inventory: trail cams, running locks, secured breaker box, reinforced. Still, I wasn't about to sit there alone waiting to see if something else happened. So I grabbed my phone again and called Randall. He answered on the first ring. "You all right?" he asked immediately. I exhaled. "Depends on your definition of all right. I just got a photo message from the woods. Someone took a picture of me. Threatening text attached." He muttered a sharp curse under his breath. "Send it." I forwarded it. There was a long pause. Then, "That's Joey, or someone with him. They want you scared." "Well," I said, "they picked the wrong engineer." Randall chuckled darkly. "Good, because I'm coming up." "You don't have to, I'm coming," he repeated. "Give me 10 minutes. Despite everything, I felt a subtle wave of relief. Not because I needed protection, but because having another set of eyes and someone who knew these mountains better than anyone felt like placing another stone between myself and chaos. 10 minutes later, I saw the glow of Randall's lantern through the trees. A moment after that, he walked onto my porch, raincoat, dripping, expression set in a grim frown. He stepped inside and shut the door behind him. "Let me see the message again," he said. I handed him my phone. He studied the image, frowning as if memorizing every pixel. "That's taken from the old game trail," he muttered. "Half-mile loop behind your property. Only folks who know the ridge use it." "Which means Joey," I said. "Or Karen," he added. "Don't underestimate her. She's crazy, but she's crafty." I nodded. "What do you think they're planning? Nothing good." He sank onto one of my chairs. "But I'll tell you this, people like them push as far as they think they can get away with. Once someone pushes back harder, they fold." "And how do we push back harder?" I asked. "By making sure the law has everything. Every message, every threat, every photo. And by making it damn clear that their bullying won't work." I sat across from him. "Detective Harris has the footage and the message. You think that'll be enough?" "It'll be enough to start something real," Randall said. "Enough that the next time they try anything, the sheriff won't be asking questions. He'll be putting cuffs on someone." I exhaled slowly. "Good." We sat in silence for a minute, each of us listening to the distant patter of rain on the roof. Then Randall looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why are you fighting so hard?" The question wasn't accusatory, just curious. Quiet. Earnest. I took a breath. "Because I worked my whole life to get this cabin," I said slowly. "Because this place is supposed to be peaceful. Because I won't be bullied off land I legally own. And because if I don't stand up now, they'll do this to the next person. And the next. And the next." Randall nodded. "Good answer." We shared a small, tired smile. His phone buzzed then. He glanced at it. His eyebrows shot up. "Well," Randall said, "you're not the only one they're bothering." "What now?" He held up the screen. Several messages from neighbors up and down the ridge. One read, "Karen and Joey came by again, asking us to sign their complaint, getting hostile when we refused." Another, she said, "Your cabin's under investigation. We know that's a lie." You need help. Another heard yelling outside their place an hour ago. Sounded like a fight. And another she's telling people you're trying to get her evicted from the ridge. Just a heads up. I sat back. They were spiraling, unraveling. This was their last desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. People are finally seeing them for who they are, Randall said quietly. They're losing their grip. And when people like them lose control, that's when they get sloppy. Sloppy, desperate, dangerous. A faint noise outside made us both look toward the window. It wasn't thunder, it wasn't a branch. It was footsteps, slow, heavy, crunching on wet gravel. Randall put a hand up telling me silently, "Don't move." The footsteps came closer, then stopped just beyond the reach of the porch light. I eased myself toward the window, heart pounding, careful not to make noise. Randall stood behind me at an angle, watching from the corner of his eye. A shadow moved between the trees, then another. 2 figures, one tall, one shorter, Joey and Karen. I felt my pulse spike, but I didn't panic. This time I was inside. I had Randall. I had cameras. I had every piece of evidence I needed. Karen's voice cut through the wet night, shrill, furious, cracking with hysteria. "I know you're in there," she screamed. "Come out and face us. You think you can ruin our lives." Joey's voice layered behind hers, low and angry. "Open the door, man. We're talking," Randall whispered. "Don't engage." I nodded. Karen shrieked again. "You can't hide." Randall leaned close. "Let them yell. Let them dig their own grave. This is exactly the kind of behavior the sheriff needs to see." And as if on cue, as if the mountain itself agreed, the sound of a second engine rolled up the gravel road. Blue and red lights flickered through the trees. Karen's ranting cut off. Joey froze. The sheriff's cruiser pulled into view. Detective Harris stepped out. Even from inside, I could see the moment Karen realized the one truth she'd been running from. She wasn't in control anymore. Not this time. Not ever again. In the end, what happened at my mountain cabin wasn't just about a crazy neighbor stealing electricity. It was a blunt reminder that boundaries only protect us if we're willing to defend them. It's tempting to keep the peace and look the other way, but people like this Karen count on exactly that silence. When you document, stay calm, and stand your ground with facts instead of fury, you don't just protect your own home. You quietly set a standard for the whole neighborhood. Respect is not something entitled people are owed just because they shout the loudest. It's something that's earned by honoring other people's time, work, and property. If you've ever been pushed around by an HOA, a nosy neighbor, or a self-appointed enforcer, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, what time it is there, and whether you'd have handled this Karen the same way. And if you enjoy seeing entitled people get exactly what they deserve, don't forget to subscribe and stick around. There are a lot more stories where this one came from.